Here we go. Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar on community-led approaches to retrofit. And this is the first in a series of 4 webinars, and we're looking today on business models for the able-to-pay market. There's myself, and also we have Gio and Nadia from South East London Community Energy. We'll introduce ourselves in a sec. Just a quick thing to say, the slides and the recording will be made available after today's webinar, so no need to ask about that. Use the chat to say hello and obviously discuss things as we go through. Use the Q&A function to ask specific questions. We have a presentation to make, and then at the end of that, we'll have time for questions and answers. Just a little bit about the aims of the session. We're looking to develop an understanding of retrofit and the opportunity for retrofit for the able to pay and to create business models around that. We're looking at the dynamics of the sector, what's going on, how we build client bases, how we make that opportunity pay, and then we look at some case studies and some key learning. And just to let you know, this series of webinars is part of a project that was funded by the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust that involves South East London Community Energy, Brighton and Hove Energy Cooperative Services, Behesco, and Carbon Co-op. So yeah, and it's a pleasure to be sharing this with the wider community energy sector. Do you want to add anything to that, Gio or Nadia?
No, maybe to say that it's part of a series of webinars.
Yeah.
So
yeah, every Monday for the next 4 weeks, 1 till 2, we'll be running these, and each one will address a different aspect. The next one's around retrofit in the social housing and private rental market. Okay, just a little bit about Carbon Co-op. We're a community energy organisation. We're based in Greater Manchester, but we operate further afield than that. We are a membership organisation that helps our members access technical services to make big changes and big reductions in carbon emissions that we know are necessary to tackle climate change. A lot of the work we've done over the years has been around retrofit. And in the last year, we've thrown off a new sister community benefit society, people powered retrofit. So a lot of the knowledge and information we'll share today comes from that experience and the work of people powered retrofit. But PPR and Carbon Co-op are actually 2 different but linked organisations. Nadia and Gio.
Hi, we're from South East London Community Energy. My name is Giovanna Speciale. I'm the CEO, and
I'm Nadia Smith, and I'm the project manager of Future Fit Homes, which is our retrofit project for the able to pay market.
And we're an organisation whose mission is really about transitioning to an energy system that's fit for the future, one that is distributed, low carbon, one in which we manage energy demand, but also one that leaves no one behind. And what we'll be talking about today is our Future Fit Home service that forms part of a number of different things that we do. So we own and operate community finance solar. We also do a lot of fuel poverty alleviation work. And in addition to that, we have a service specifically for the able to pay that very much came out of a lot of the work we were doing with our fuel pool.
Fantastic, thanks very much. Right, let's crack on. We'll go through the presentation and we'll have time for questions at the end. Okay, just and I know from looking at the attendee list, we have a range of people at different levels of understanding and knowledge of retrofit. So just to give everyone the same level of knowledge, retrofit is the retrospective fitting of energy efficiency improvements to a home in order to lower the energy demand, the heating demand for that home. It involves things like insulation and other energy reduction measures, but also micro generation, things like solar panels and heating systems, such as heat pumps, and also takes in the definition of smart management systems as well of those other technologies. I think in thinking about retrofit as well, we not only need to think about the householders and their priorities and their motivations, but also the challenge around retrofit contractors and the need to develop and skill up and to support the development of supply chain to meet that demand. The two go hand in hand. And there are lots of reasons why we should retrofit homes. I mean, and I think community energy, many of us come from a background of thinking about climate change and carbon emissions and how much of the current emissions come from domestic houses and how this can be reduced. And retrofit can make significant reductions and impacts in that. Some of our previous projects, we've saved over 50% of heating demand and 60% of carbon emissions from retrofit. But there are other added benefits around improved health, warmer homes are more healthy homes, reduced bills, and thinking about fuel poverty, which, I mean, even the headlines today is an increasing and current challenge. It also helps develop new skills for contractors and has a local economic development benefit as well, creating new local businesses in the same areas that we have householders and demand. So yeah, there's lots of reasons why we should do it, and I won't go at length because I think we're probably all on the same page. So the opportunity, okay, we're going to think about in this webinar those who are able to pay. And we fully acknowledge, and the work that the different organizations do is that there are other people that aren't able to pay, and that retrofit the benefits of retrofit need to be provided to them too. We'll address those in future webinars. There is also a wider issue around energy justice and the need to redistribute resources within society as well, which is a larger discussion. So yes, we're focusing on the able to pay, but that's not to say that we don't acknowledge there are other people out there. We're looking at those who are able to pay and willing to pay. And in thinking about that, we need to think about who those people are. They aren't an amorphous blob of people that are sat out there already. We need to think who the clients are, who are the people who will put their hands in their pockets to pay for this sort of thing. Where do they live? What are their lives like? And how much money do these clients have? Because that all wraps into our ability to deliver and develop businesses that will meet those needs. For those who aren't familiar, this is like a key kind of concept behind our thinking, and I think the wider sector, and that's the innovation curve. This is like a standard innovation curve that has been observed and documented across many different technologies and services, from anything from mobile phones to electric vehicles to all sorts of things. And what this typifies is it's called the Rogers innovation curve, is that new innovations are typically adopted by innovators to begin with, who are those super early interested people who will go out and test a new thing, even though it might not be ready yet. Then you get early adopters. Again, they're kind of more willing to engage in services that might not be fully developed or fully mature yet. Then you move on to the early majority and the late majority, and then the laggards at the end. And I think one of the learnings from energy efficiency in the UK has been that we've been too ready to develop and design services for the majority. And I think for all sorts of different reasons, government and local government look to the majority, which has ignored the early adopters and the innovators, and also kind of overstated the maturity of the market for retrofit as well. And hence a lot of things have fallen on their faces because they've come too early and they've not looked at the innovators and early adopters and typified their needs and experiences and their particular kind of situations. When we look at these early adopters, when we talk to them, and this is where community energy is so well placed, because so many of our members and the people that we work with are early adopters, are the innovators. When we look at them, their needs and motivations look quite different to what we might typify the majority, the late and early majority. They tend to be motivated by certain things, predominantly around climate change and tackling climate change, also improving and making homes warmer. Money comes into it, but is often a kind of like a secondary kind of motivation above and beyond these other things. I think to a degree, the crisis at the moment is changing that a little bit, but in the in the inquiries that we're getting at the moment, it's around like carbon, and it's around being warmer. And this helps us segment and helps us work with people who are more willing to go early and who are more typified by working in our sector. It's also where we can have an impact as trusted intermediaries to work with this demographic and audience. And when we look at this audience and look at their ability and their budgets and their ability to finance work, what we find is these early adopters tend to have the resources basically to pay for services that are more, well, in the kind of area of deep retrofit and whole house retrofit. So we're talking about thousands of pounds. Our mean or median, I can't remember, our median budget at the moment is something like 40 to 50,000 pounds of a project, which means that they can not only kind of make the kind of emission reductions that we know are needed for climate change, but we also know they're able to fund the kind of services, the enabling services that us as community energy intermediaries are able to offer in that space. So that's a good thing. And then in terms of segmentation, I think it's really important to build on all those things, whether it be motivations, budgets, and what have you, and to typify what many people call personas. And there is some work out here by Loughborough University that we've particularly drawn upon. What we do here is look at specific personas. It might be that you typify things differently in your area, but yeah, we look at pragmatists who are motivated by climate change, but also realize that they have a certain amount of money and they need to do a certain amount of stuff. And we have climate idealists who want to go to as far as they can on climate change and keep pushing the envelope. And they're slightly different motivations and slightly different services that they want. And we also have civic-minded retirees, people that are doing something because they know it's the right thing to do. It might not necessarily be about climate change. It might be about just their civic duty, really. So we have that, yeah, a range of personas, a range of segmentation. And for me, summarizing this section, it's about understanding the market, understanding the opportunity before moving on to thinking how might we be able to meet that opportunity and what are their specific needs. So with that in mind, I'm going to talk a little bit about the dynamics of the sector now in a little bit more detail. And I think this is worthwhile understanding for thinking about how community energy groups might tailor and target services for these specific demographics and audiences. I think one of the key kind of dynamics I want to highlight is the role of design in retrofit. Now, many of the services and offers delivered today, especially in a government and a local authority context, have to a greater or lesser extent removed the idea of design from the retrofit service. And I think Green Deal was the best kind of example of that. The service that ran 2013, 2014 in the UK. That featured an innovative finance model, which tied loan finance against your meter. I think the interest was too high, but it was an interesting model. There was an assessment methodology there. There was a standard around contractors. This is fantastic. So you get an assessment, and then you find a contractor, you get the works done. Now, there was a downward pressure on costs there because the government thought people aren't willing to put money in their pocket. This has to be a cost neutral service. People, there has to be a golden rule there. So what that does is drive down the idea of a value. Yeah. So the assessments started at 100, 150 pounds and were being pushed down and down to 50 pounds, something like that. That meant there was a reduction in quality. Then it was then there was a pressure on contractors basically to deliver and implement the works themselves. What was missing in between is any kind of idea of design, yeah. And what we've learned since, and but even before then, there are good examples of where more complex, deeper retrofit, or not necessarily that deep, but some measures like external wall insulation have a requirement for some degree of design, a designer to be involved in some stage there, to mitigate the risks that we know are present around external wall insulation and other things like that. And the squeezing of this kind of value chain squeezed out the role of design and cited it within the contractor. So the contractor will both design and build that measure. But ultimately that kind of squeezes out that quality and it disappears. And I think, especially working in a local authority context, we see a kind of, there will be systems and checks and balances, which mean we don't need any design, you know, quality standards and this sort of thing. And time again, it's been demonstrated that that's not actually been the case, that having some role for design and some role for a retrofit designer is really crucial in making a quality service work, and one that will meet the needs of those early adopters who want to invest substantial amounts of money. So this is a conundrum for community energy groups wanting to invest and develop services here, because if an organization has lower capacity around in the construction industry, they don't necessarily have a designer or an architect or what have you involved. That limits the ability of that community energy group to deliver services that meet the needs of this kind of the value proposition of householders with money to pay. And there is a kind of downward push to say, oh, we'll sort of create systems that don't require design. But that's actually what the householders themselves want. So there's a conundrum there and a challenge. How does design work in this context? And how do we, as community energy organizations, without necessarily that capacity, acquire that capacity? So that's the role of design. There are other things in this sector, especially around on the right hand side, PAS 2035, which is the quality framework mandated by government in this sector, which sets out a process by which retrofit should be delivered, a stepwise process to encourage quality and other things there around health and what have you. And I think it's important to acknowledge that standard's there, but it's also important to acknowledge the immature status of the standard. And I speak as an organization who are a member of the panel that are developing this, that I think it needs to be recognized that PAS 2035 has a way to go to develop and to enable retrofit. And PAS 2035 is especially used at the moment in a publicly procured works, whether that be social housing or the Green Homes Grant LAD schemes that you see out there. So it's worked, and it doesn't, and there is a lot of tension there within the sector about how it's working in that context. It's rarely, if ever, been fully implemented in a able to pay owner occupier context. So it's something that which is a quality framework that we need to be minded of, and certainly the people powered retrofit service, we're harmonizing and developing our systems within this framework, but we also need to acknowledge the drawbacks there as well. On the left hand side, this is a project, a small project plan of work, and this is quite a typical, it's taken from REBA, which is the architect's kind of body, regulatory body in the UK. So what I want to highlight here is that there are already architects out there that in the mainstream are developing and delivering refurbishment processes in a way that can be repurposed for retrofit. So yeah, there's two different messages here. One is PAS 2035, and one is that there is already a set of quality standards out there in the retrofit, in the architecture market. Fabric first, I think, is another kind of dynamic within the market and something to highlight. And fabric first is the idea that you invest in reducing energy demand first before you move on to other things there. And we did a big event a couple of weeks ago on insulation and heat pumps and the dynamic there. And a certain school of thought, oh, you can throw a heat pump in anywhere. But I think for all sorts of reasons, it's useful and important to invest in the fabric and reducing demand first. both thinking about energy demand and peak demand, where we're thinking about more energy systems and things like heat pumps and electric vehicles. But yeah, fabric first. Assessments. Okay, again, another dynamic within the market. And I talked briefly about Green Deal assessments and the reduction in quality. There is a number of options out there for doing assessments. Yeah. And you'll see a number of providers of assessments out there, whether they be EPCs, energy performance certificates, to more complex things like planning house, PHPP, which is kind of a passive house planning package, and things like people powered retrofits, home retrofit planner, which is based on full SAP. What I want to emphasize here is that there is a continuum in quality, where EPCs are generally fairly low quality and fairly inaccurate, but they're very cheap to do. Upwards to these other things, PHPP and the full SAP kind of models, which are very accurate, but more costly to do. It take more time, and they require the consumer, the client in the end, to pay for them. But they're better able to inform the higher value works that we know that there's an opportunity in this area for. So I think it is worth thinking about this idea of assessments and surveys. I know Southeast London Community Energy also been working with heat camera surveys, so we might talk a little bit about that as well in a subsequent slide. But yeah, it's worth bearing in mind that these different assessments out there and different standards, and which as community energy organizations you engage in, is part of that conundrum before, which is about design and quality and resource and capacity. Okay, so we're now going to talk a bit about building a client base. We talked about segmentation. We talked about some of the dynamics that are going on within the market. We can come back to them in detail in the Q&A if necessary. Now, a big thing I often hear is like, well, I say it often, it's increasingly rare, but it is still heard, is like, no one wants to do this. There aren't the people who want to pay for this, you know. And what I would say is like, we've never, ever had a problem with demand from clients, never being short of people willing to engage in projects and put their hands in their pockets to pay for stuff. I think I want to talk very briefly about community-based social marketing, because this fits very well onto community energy organizations' way of building clients and building groups of people interested in being involved in all kinds of projects that we run. But social marketing is the idea. It's community-based, bottom-up marketing, which generally is around like values and around common sets of values. And it's a specific approach, and there's a great toolkit out there from the Better Buildings program in the US, but it's around running community events, running home energy parties in people's homes, working with community champions and local advocates, working with trusted organizations within a distinct geographical locality to build this interest from the bottom up and build this community of interest. And what I would say is that it's not necessarily about building clients or, so let's say, selling to clients. It's about building a wider set of interests from which clients then come. Yeah. And it's a highly effective way of generating interest, generating clients, and building people into this. And I know, whoops, I've skipped the slide. So you want to talk a bit about Future Fit Homes at this point, Gio and Nadia?
For sure. Well, just to carry on with your piece about social marketing. Essentially, what we've been trying to do with Future Fit Homes is really focus on promoting a retrofit advice service using the social marketing tools. So we've got a little bit of funding, not a lot. We got a little bit of funding that enabled us to pay Nadia to go out and do a lot of very community-based outreach. She's been doing webinars. We've held a few retrofit parties, think Tupperware party with a sort of climate bent. We've liaised with community organisations. So Brookmill Conservation Society, for example, is a sort of a residents association essentially, and we work with them to do some very some retrofit webinars that were very targeted at their house type. So we've been doing a lot of this. It is, I believe, the very best way of doing marketing. What I would say is that the challenge is very much about scaling up quickly. And I'll talk about this soon, because actually, I think our experience has been different to Carbon Co-op, that it is difficult to sell. And specifically what is difficult to sell is retrofit coordination, the advice that a lot of people want to go ahead using their own, without that support or advice. They maybe want a little bit of a webinar to guide them along their way, but actually selling a service that is supporting them through that process, we found is quite difficult, and that getting the scale very quickly is quite difficult.
Cool. Yeah, and that's a good thing about this learning project, that different organizations have different experiences to bring. Okay, making it pay. So we've thought about the opportunity, the dynamics, how to raise awareness, how to build a client base. Now, how do we make it pay? You know, and I think there is a feeling within the sector that a lot of this needs to be based on grant-based schemes, but to an extent there are, well, there certainly are people willing to put their hands in their pockets. So how do we make that pay? Okay, and there was a question from Sarah, I think, which was about, have we talked to householders and understood what their barriers are? And we've done a lot of that stuff. So, and certainly with People Powered Retrofit in the project that led up to that foundation, there was a lot of work with householders. Householders feel, the ones we work with who want to retrofit their homes and have the money and are either blocked or haven't started their journey, they feel overwhelmed by the complexity and the technical detail. They don't really know where to start. They don't know who to talk to first. And I think a lot of us who work in this sector can resonate with that. They have difficulty making key decisions. Often we and others tell them, retrofit's quite hard and you don't want to get it wrong, which they hear, but they also then are worried about the risks and what could go wrong. And they tend to they freeze, basically. They don't progress on. They have a report hearing conflicting advice, and I think this will not go away. There are some people that tell you, you have to do this, you should do this, you must get that. And there are people in there are people with the best of intentions. There are also people out there who are trying to sell a particular technology and are not really interested in anything else. And, you know, to an extent, are mis-selling. They have problems finding contractors and problems or worries ensuring high quality works. Yeah, so that's the kind of barriers. So what they want from a service, we found, is they want advice with basic help and signposting, someone to offer that hand-holding, someone to help it make things a little bit easier for them. They're after an assessment that gives them an overview of the measures that they could go out and purchase. They're interested in detailed design advice service. And I can't emphasize that enough, that this kind of demographic are really, they're used to working with architects, or they know people who've worked with architects. They understand the value of design. They understand the risks and what could go wrong. They are really interested in design. They're interested in specialist technical advisors as well. And we found quite a need for structural engineers, and also particularly in damp surveys. I mean, in Manchester, you'd think nothing else. Help with the procurement of contractors and thinking about local supply chain networks. On-site quality assurance frameworks, which tallies with that PAS 2035 kind of framework. And they're after a complete retrofit service, essentially, that can go end to end. And this both the need and what they're after. This informs things like one-stop services like People Powered Retrofit. Some key learning. Was this yours? Yeah.
Mind, Jonathan, I just had a few points to make on the last slide.
Go for it.
So I think the difference between the work that we've been doing and the work that People Powered Retrofit has been doing is because we haven't scaled as quickly, we have mainly been dealing with the early adopters rather than the innovators. We find that the early adopters are wanting most of these things, apart from the detailed design advice service and the specialist technical advisors. So we haven't had any structural engineers or architects on board We've mainly been dealing with people that are looking for that hand-holding, looking for someone impartial and reliable to give them some information.
So our Future Fit home service, I want to talk a little bit about that, because we've had a different experience, and I think it's important that in community energy we quite often talk the case study talk. You know, we talk about the successes, we don't necessarily talk about the things that have been incredibly difficult. Our service, the Future Fit Homes, really came out of our fuel poverty work. We were doing a lot of work, assessing need for retrofit for our fuel poor clients to be able to get them grant funding. And it occurred to us that maybe we should extend this into a service that is for the able to pay market, that could act as a little social enterprise that sits alongside the other services that we were doing. And very much it was from a logic where if we want to tackle climate change in South East London, actually, the thing we most have to do is work with the able to pay market and enable them to retrofit their homes. That's where most of the carbon reductions are going to come in an urban area like South East London. We spent a long time working out what the service should be. We got a little bit of funding that enabled some of our staff to get a qualification as retrofit coordinators. And we ended up with a service. The service that we ended up with was very similar to what Carbon Co-op was providing. But in addition, we provided thermal imaging in partnership with Cheese, based in Bristol, who give you they'll give you the whole package, the equipment, the process, they'll train some people to do thermal imaging. And we also decided to add a one-to-one advice service. Those people who weren't prepared to go down the whole house plan route, but wanted a helping hand along the way. We did a lot of outreach, as I've spoken about. And we also had a whole house retrofit service. So this is very, very similar to what Carbon Co-op was doing, except we worked in partnership with another organisation called Retrofit Works and Parity Projects. Retrofit Work provided a network of vetted contractors, and Parity Project provided a format, if you like, a process. We have recently withdrawn from doing that simply because we weren't able to make it pay. And there were two reasons for that. That was due to the inexperience of our retrofit coordinators. A retrofit coordinator can only do retrofit coordination once they are experienced. Getting that experience, it can be quite costly. So we were finding they were doing whole house plans, but they were taking ages to do it. And the problem was that EcoFurb were only able to pay us because they wanted to put some downward pressure on that, on the cost of that initial plan. They would only, we could only get paid for 1.5 days of work to do each whole house plan. So it was costing us an enormous amount of money. We had to withdraw. So I think there were some lessons learned in our experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to sort of draw on those key learnings, and I think Jonathan will completely agree with most of these, but feel free to jump in, Jonathan. So it is a tough market to find if you've not scaled up quickly. That innovators market that has the funding and the will to go through the full process of retrofit is a really tough market to find. You really need to do a lot of marketing, a lot of community engagement to scale quickly enough to bring in the kind of reliable income stream that you need to keep a project running, just doing retrofit and not doing it as like an addition to other services that your organization provides. We found it's really, really crucial that you get specialist and experienced retrofit coordinators. We had newly qualified retrofit coordinators, and I think part of the issue in getting set up it quickly enough and building that scale quickly enough was that our team was very much learning on the job. They had the qualification, they were learning on the job to some extent in terms of retrofit coordination, and it was a good learning process. But if you're going to scale quickly, you need to have someone who has done this very frequently previously, and those people are really, really hard to come by. Working with delivery partners, Giovanna has mentioned in terms of our work with EcoFurb, it can be unsteady, but it's due to a number of issues, very much supply chain issues we've found. But you really need to work with a delivery partner that you think has the supply chain in place, has those processes in place, and is very reliable if you're going to work with a partner to deliver that. The alternative is you develop it and do it all in-house. And that brings me to the sort of one of the biggest key learnings here is you've got to have a foolproof project management process, or a process for retrofit coordination, or the partner who can provide that for you. The services for us that worked really well, we did have the templates, we did have the structure there, such as the thermal imaging. For the other services, we were trying to develop ourselves, learning from other groups. It definitely took a bit longer, and we definitely found that, as Jonathan mentioned earlier, that process is very much set up and stable in the grant-funded market, in the fuel poverty market, in the large-scale retrofit stuff, but it's still not there yet in as much accessibility as it needs to be for the able-to-pay market. You can do this as a small-scale service, as long as you're doing it alongside other work. And we're finding that actually you need to work with freelance retrofit coordinators if you want to do it alongside other work as something that's in addition to your existing community energy work. I think that.
Great. Sorry, on mute. That's fantastic. This is the last slide before we look at some case studies. What I've done here is, I think it's really important in thinking about your group, your service, thinking about what's the value proposition and who's willing to pay for it. And you can go from this continuum, you can go from like an advocate to an advisor to a practitioner. You know, there's kind of like simple advocate, more complicated advice, more complicated still practitioner. And the model there, and again, this I sort of simplify this, so you know, don't take them all the thing, but it's showing the range. Like as an advocate, you're kind of working with a third party, and you're sort of out there promoting a third party, and potentially gaining an income for generating leads. Advisor, you might be doing something like a EPC assessment or a better assessment, you know, than that. With a practitioner, you've got a full kind of assessment service there. The skills required for an advocate is kind of minimal. It might be that you're doing other energy work, you know, renewables or what have you. So you don't need to invest a lot of time in training. An advisor, you need a bit more. A practitioner, you need, as we've talked about, capacity, understanding, learning's got to be high. The fees you can generate as an advocate are low or potentially nothing. You know, you might be then, you know, advocating for someone else, perhaps a private sector organization. They might, you know, give you £50 or £20 per lead, you know, that's relatively small. Into advice and practitioner, that's when you're looking to generate thousands of pounds from a client, you know, but you obviously need the capacity to do that. And then that moves on to the next thing, like low overall capacity for an advocacy service, bit more for advice, more still for practitioner. There's limited risk in being an advocate, but there is reputational risk. What if you're advocating for a partner who then turn out to be not great at delivery for all sorts of reasons? Maybe you don't have the technical capacity to understand their level of quality, and so you can get caught out. Obviously, there's a high level of risk in terms of delivering something like a full service yourself, but the impact is higher there as well. And that's why I've questioned the impact for an advocate. Possibly, you know, you're having impact by, you know, generating something for a third party. But yeah, what your value proposition is, what you're trying to deliver, has an impact on capacity and skills and learning and all that sort of stuff. Okay, I'm going to go through some quick case studies and then we'll throw it out for the Q&A. This is a project that Carbon Co-op did nearly 10 years ago now, which was a program of retrofit properties. There was funding from DEC at the time, from government, but the funding was to develop our capacity, bring in technical skills, and then the works themselves were paid for by the householders, but DEC also gave us some 0% interest loan money. So the money, some of the money was lent to the householders to fund the work, but they are paying the money back. They're paying the loans back. In some cases, or most of the cases, they also put their own money in as well. So this was a really interesting project for us because it helped on a relatively small scale develop a high impact project with high levels of technical expertise, and sort of took us to another level. You know, it really bumped us up a level of capacity and expertise and knowledge, you know, and also we gained profile and trust really as well, because we're able to point to previous projects. But you know, the ambitious projects, there's about £500,000 project all in all, you know, in terms of the grant. I think we got, the grant was something like £75,000 or £50,000, £75,000. The rest was the loans, but the then, you know, and the money that was put in by the householders. But really the involvement of grant there sort of leveraged trust and leveraged involvement from other money. Home Retrofit Planner is our assessment tool based on full SAP that's now been going for 10 years. And this, again, this was an underspend from DEC 10 years ago. And they would say, oh, you know, how can you help people in your area? And like, well, a key thing for us was that people need to know what to do first and how to go about it. And we developed, working with technical experts, URBED, developed an assessment methodology that then could then be rolled out. And to begin with, it was free assessments paid for initially by the DEC money and then by local authorities around a community champions program, which was great. And then more latterly, sold basically. And these now underpin our kind of wider service model, and they start at £500 per assessment and go up to 1,000. And there's a really healthy market of people willing to pay for this kind of thing, but because it's high quality, granular information that will then inform their kind of scope and scale of works that they want to do. People Powered Retrofit has come along more recently, funded initially by a BAYS pilot project, funding 6 pilot projects around the UK to generate learning on development of retrofit markets around the UK. This was taking into account the learning we previously covered around the barriers people were facing and what they wanted from a service. And this incorporates an end-to-end service that helps people all the way through. I should say as well, and I think, you know, Nadia and Gio, you know, put it really well, is like, how do you scale? How do you get that scale quickly? And I think what we've been able to do is, you know, stepwise build technical projects that are ambitious, and then be lucky enough to get that money to demonstrate a market-based approach, a social enterprise approach rather, and then use that to do a community share issue for £750,000 to say, right, now we'll invest and we'll grow our existing network already, having that technical expertise, but bring the staff in-house to be able to meet that demand. Because I think that's one way of a number of others, of overcoming that conundrum, which is like, how do we get the scale? How do we do it quick enough? And essentially that's how, I guess, businesses in the private sector work when they go out to do either bond or equity share offers. This sets out the step-by-step process, stages of People Powered Retrofit, of advice, a home retrofit planner assessment, the design using support, retrofit designer support, on-site support from coordinators, and handover as well, using a QA framework. And we have these different technical, and I think this is the theme that's come out of this, is like, how do you bring these, I think, how do you recruit these people? Because there is a lack of these people within the sector as a whole, and a lack of appropriate training for people that want to get into this area. And then how do you bring them into your organization, whether it be freelance or on a paid for basis? Both have their challenges, but these are the kind of expertise that you need. And it also includes people like software development. And I know this can seem challenging from people that are coming at it from a very, very far back, they don't have this capacity, but I think it's about stepwising building through it, but having an idea about where you're going. And then finally, a pricing model here. I'm not going to go into this in detail, obviously, things there, but how it works is it's a service essentially. And as people advance through the service and the different stages, there's a cost there from our staff and a fee that we charge the clients as well. And that's simply how it works. With People Powered Retrofit, we have ancillary services as well around software services and also training services as well, just to add to this, but the core of it is here. So this is the final slide. This is just my kind of thing. My little bit of advice to people is, what's your value proposition in this continuum? Where do you seek to affect change? And given that, what level of technical expertise will you offer and how will you build it? Will you bring it in from outside? Will you collaborate with a third party? Will you, build it in somewhere? And then finally, the third thing is like, how will you build that capacity? What stepwise approaches? We've got Chris on the call here from Loco too. And a number of people come to us and say, how do we build? And our usual advice is to say, start small, but start and think with a project, and think maybe about a £10,000 project, or getting a little bit of grant funding from a local authority or from a source, and look to build from there. And Chris, to give him absolute credit, has been one of those people that's taken those bits of advice and grown and grown and grown, and you can see the stepwise development. And I think there are some really good examples out there of people who are doing that. Yeah, it's not a simple process, and there are challenges, and it's not like some other areas of community energy, such as renewable generation, where you can point to a very simple model that can be delivered by volunteers. This is a different challenge. It's a different level of technical challenge, but it can be done, and there are people out there doing it. So thanks very much for your time. We will now have an opportunity to go through questions and answers. So how do you want to do this? We've got the Q&As. Should we go through, maybe we could do a couple at a time? I don't know, have you been looking through them, Nadia?
I have actually. So there's a few that have come in on the chat, and a few that have come in through the Q&A. So I think let's just get started. We've got quite a lot of questions to get through.
You got 10 minutes.
So if we can keep answers as short and sweet as possible, that would be great. So the first question is, 40k is a lot for people to invest. Design sounds like it sets the tone for the quality of the installation. How can you guarantee a good design?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would say is, a lot of people invest more than £40,000 in their home or in their car. And so it's not necessarily a kind of investment that is alien to a lot of people. And if you look at the value of homes as well, in terms of good design, there is a whole framework around retrofit design and PAS 2035 that sets out how design can be, if not guaranteed, can be assured in certain ways. And it is around, very, very briefly, it's around understanding the measures that are going in, ensuring that risk assessment has been done. PAS 2035 sets out a risk assessment, and that there is inspections at the appropriate times for the appropriate measures. In addition to that, contractors are evidencing their work through photographs at specific times for specific measures, and B, going through checklists just to highlight that they have done certain things at certain times as well. So yeah, there's a lot of thinking being done around this. It's not that simple, but there is thinking out there.
Yeah, and I think just to add, the people that we've seen who have that amount to invest definitely are the innovators rather than the early adopters. And most of them in London are doing retrofit around, other building works that they're doing, or other renovations that they're doing to their property. So putting in new kitchens, or, redecorating the whole house. That's when people with big budgets are coming forward. So the next question is from Michael, and he's asking you, Jonathan, since you've chosen to align, if that's the right term, with PAS 2035, whilst you're acknowledging its shortcomings, can you elucidate what you consider these shortcomings to be?
Some of it's around the order within which assessments take place and specification. There is an assumption within PAS 2035 that the person deciding on the measures is a landlord, like a social landlord. So the decision on measures comes before the assessment. So it's a bit complicated there. There's also real problems with the data warehouse around the submission of assessments and measures, where it's not fit for purpose. It's a good idea, and we really back it, and it needs support from government. At the moment, it's only the development of it is only coming from the fees that they leverage themselves. So yeah, and there are also some things around the mandation of things like ventilation, which, but ventilation, huge advocates of, but there are some glitches in there basically that need to be addressed. They're well documented, and it is basically a case of time and means to do it. But again, the PAS 2035 panel, a lot of us are kind of there in a voluntary capacity, so it's challenging. Yeah,
I mean, I would also add that, okay, so it costs, basically what the model the government is using is they're putting the cost of developing this PAS 2035 onto contractors who have to pay fees to Trustmark, and essentially those fees are way too high for small contractors to engage. So mostly they choose not to engage in the retrofit market. Hence, we've got a lot of problems with the supply chain, particularly in South East London, where there's plenty of other works, building extensions or other high value pieces of work.
Yeah. Okay, so since you just touched on this whole landlords issue, Jonathan, I'm going to take the question from Penny in the chat. And she said she hopes that we'll be able to say something about flat owners, leaseholders, including where there's a resident management company with an interest, but either with technical issues or without sufficient collective interest in spending the money on collective retrofit. So the leaseholder is limited to the changes that they can make under leasehold. Yes, so comments on this, I guess I'll kick off, because we have been doing a lot of work recently with landlords and with leaseholders. We're finding it's very hard. There aren't many solutions. What we have been finding is we've had some housing cooperatives come forward and take some paid advice on what they can suggest that the management company implements and takes forward, and they're using our advice as a leverage to say, look, this is what we need you to do. Whether it will be done or not, we really don't know. And sort of working with private rental sector landlords, that the only kind of hold or push there is at the minute is the minimum energy efficiency standards. There are a significant number of landlords that aren't meeting those. So there is a role for community energy to play in actually putting that that forwards to landlords and making them aware of it and sort of having that stick. At the same time, in London, we've got a bit of a carrot with grant funding for tenants that are on low income, but it is sort of few and far between, a bit hard to find.
Yeah, and I think it's really useful if the next webinar is going to be about how to engage in the market, the grant funded market for how to support the grant funded market for feel poor, or part of the webinar will be about that. And I think it's useful to be able to understand that there are different models for different types of tenure, and that it's not a one size fits all.
Jonathan, any points on this, or should we head on?
I would just say that in Glasgow, they've been doing a lot of work on tenements, and that brings that similar kind of collective responsibility issues there as well. So yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to take these two questions together. Andrew is asking about retrofit assessments. Is there any scope to support occupants to monitor their household, for example, the internal temperature or their energy uses over winter periods to inform the survey? So having like real world performance involved in the survey. And then there's also a question from Sarah in the chat asking if we've ever used an interest survey. Basically, have we ever asked people what sort of measures they want to get sort of gather demand through community networks? So I'll just start briefly with Andrew's question, because funnily enough, I have a few devices sat here on my desk. They are plug sockets, or something that goes between a plug socket and a plug for a device that can monitor the energy use of that device, links it to an app, and the householder has an idea about, you know, when they're using energy and how that's affecting things. We've seen new concepts around this. We haven't really done it yet.
Nice idea.
Yeah.
Maybe you could be the first to try, Andrew.
Yeah, and we run a thing called Eco Home Lab, which is like a maker space for householders wanting to do that, using things like Open Energy Monitor. I also give a shout out to the smart meter services that you can access your data. So I think they're going to play an increasing role both in baselining energy, but also evidencing impact afterwards.
Okay, brilliant. So quick question from Gordon in the chat. On the statistics you had, Jonathan, about your budgets, do you have any info on the sample size for those statistics?
Yeah, I answered that in the chat as well. But those, I think it was the survey from that, I can't remember, put it in the chat, but it's like about 50 people. And then, but more latterly, we ask it retrofit project brief stage as people come through, and we've had more than 70 people go through that. So I think it's self-selecting, because we advertise our service to those types of people. So that's who comes through the door. And I think it's as much a note of the success at targeting as like, oh, there are loads and loads of people like that out there. There's enough to sustain services like that, I would say, with great confidence.
I mean, I can answer that, but with a half answer. So I think we received £25,000 worth of funding in 2 different batches for different funders to before we got to the stage where we were ready to start doing whole house plans and provide that sort of holistic service. I will note it wasn't enough. I mean, we weren't able to scale up quick enough with that. It's a tough market. Okay,
we're really running out of time here.
Yeah, I've been answering some of them, some of the Q&As there, yeah, thank you very much for everyone for participating. What we'll do is make this available and email people with a link, and we can try and also look at the Q&As after and see whether we can answer any of them as well. But they've been really fantastic, so thank you everyone who's participated. So yeah, I don't know if you've anything to add, Gio or Nadia.
Just a quick reminder for everyone to sign up to the next webinars. We had posted the link in the chat a little bit earlier. I will try and grab that for you right now again. So the next few webinars, we've got 4 in total, and they're going to always be Monday afternoons, same time, lunchtime, and yeah, a few different topics within retrofit. But I've just posted the link in the chat, so we look forward to seeing you at Monday lunchtime next week.
Fantastic. Yes, and a few people asking in the chat about smart meter. Power Shaper Monitor is the service to look for. Yeah, okay, yeah, thanks very much, and see you next week.
Cheers.